Good afternoon. It's good to see you today. It's a beautiful day here in Cuthbert, Georgia. Glad to share with you another one of my favorite hymns. This collection of these hymn devotions and studies and backgrounds is taken from the 150 of the world's greatest hymn stories written by Dr. Robert J. Morgan. And if you enjoy these, I encourage you to look that book up. Send it to yourself as a Christmas gift. You will not be disappointed. You'll enjoy it. You will learn. You will grow closer to the Lord as you study it. One of my favorite hymns is the 23rd Psalm. It's always been my favorite. I guess I memorized it as a child, and it's always been special to me. Some of the early verses, well, let me just read the whole psalm to you. It's kind of short, but very meaningful. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Quite often on autumn nights, as we're sleeping peacefully in our own beds at home, millions upon millions of songbirds are traveling overhead through the darkness, heading south. Somehow they know their way. God has given them a state-of-the-art GPS or an internal guidance system that gets them to where they need to go on their way. And we're much more valuable than these sparrows. If God guides his creation, will he not even also guide his children? The psalmist in Psalm 23 agrees, saying, He leads me, he leadeth me. Dr. Joseph H. Gilmore was the son of the governor of New Hampshire, and he gave this account of writing the hymn, He Leadeth Me. As a young man recently graduated from seminary, I was supplying on a given Sunday in the pulpit of the First Baptist Church of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. At the midweek service on the 26th of March in 1862, I set out to give people an exposition of the 23rd Psalm, which he said I had given before on 3 or 4 occasions at other places. But this time I didn't get any further than the words, He leadeth me. Those words took hold of me, such as they have never done before or since, and I saw in them a significance of which I had never dreamed. It was at the darkest hours of the Civil War. I didn't refer to that fact. That was, in other words, I didn't think that I did, but it may subconsciously have led me to realize that God's leadership is one of the most significant facts in the human experience, that it makes no difference on how we are led or where we are led, as long as we're sure that God is leading us. At the close of the meeting, Joseph Gilmore said, a few of us went next door to the parlor of the house of his host, Deacon Watson, and everyone kept talking about the thoughts that the Gilmore had emphasized in his message. And then in there, Gilmore said he took the back page of his notes and he wrote down this poem. He said, I penciled the poem, talking to his friends and writing at the same time, and then he handed the poem to his wife and thought no more about it. Or without him knowing it, she sent that poem to the Watchman and Reflector, which was a newspaper published in Boston where it was first printed. And that poem starts this way. He leadeth me, O blessed thought, O words with heavenly comfort fraught. Whate'er I do, where'er I be, still 'tis God's hand that leadeth me. Sometimes mid scenes of deepest gloom, sometimes where Eden's bowers bloom, by waters still or troubled sea, still it is God's hand that leadeth me. Lord, I would clasp thy hand in mine, nor ever murmur nor repine, content whatever lot I see, since 'tis thy hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me, by his own hand he leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by his hands he leadeth me. Gilmore goes on to say, I didn't know until 1865 that my poem had been set to music. It was set to music by William Bradbury. But I was going to Rochester, New York to preach a trial sermon before the Second Baptist Church of Rochester. He got to their chapel the day that he reached the city, and walking into the chapel, he grabbed one of the hymnals that they had there in the pews that they sang, and he said, I just opened up the hymnal and saw the hymn, He Leadeth Me, that he had written in his own words. Had never seen it before. He said, I accepted that very thought as an indication of the divine guidance, and I have no doubt that I was right. In other words, he thought that God was having a hand in his coming to that church where he stayed many years later. That hymn has been translated into many different languages, perhaps more than any other modern hymn, as it appeals especially to the wanderer and the outcast. He said he's received many touching testimonials of the comfort and help that it's rendered to God's dear children. He said, it was to that end that I take it that he put it into my mind and heart when, as it must be seen, I hadn't the faintest conception of what I was doing. It just came to him. He wrote it down, handed it to his wife. God blessed it. Gilmore writes later, one of my former students, when he was a seminary professor, his former students writes me that it is the favorite hymn of Japanese Christians. Apparently one of his students became a missionary to Japan. He also said that the hymn was actually sung in a Chinese court of justice by a Chinese man who had never even seen a white missionary to show the presiding justice what a Christian hymn was like. That Chinese man was on trial in that court for renting a building to some Christians who had wanted to rent a room and use it for an opium refuge. A lot of the people of that time were addicted to opium. Christians were there ministering to them, and they were also singing that hymn. And the judge said, what is this music you're talking about? He told the judge that at their meetings, Christians prayed and that they sang hymns. The judge said, what kind of hymns are you talking about? And that Chinese man sang, He Leadeth Me. And I'll conclude with the last stanza of He leadeth me. And when my task on earth is done, when by thy grace the victory's won, even death's cold wave I will not flee, since God through Jordan leadeth me. He leadeth me, by his own hand he leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by his hand he leadeth me. Will you take God's leadership in your life? Will you follow him? Will you do whatever he asks? Go wherever he goes? He will lead you. He'll take you by the hand. He'll put you where you need to be. May God bless you as you have a blessed day in him.